Hey everyone, I'm Allison Morris. You're watching NBC News Now, and there is a lot happening today.
I think that given the circumstances, the best way I can help now is if I step aside and let government get back to governing. And therefore, that's what I'll do.
Andrew Cuomo is out. New York's embattled governor announcing his resignation today. What he said about the sexual harassment allegations that forced him out the door as New York gets ready to welcome its first female governor.
The yeas are 69, the nays are 30. The bill, as amended, is passed.
The Senate finally passing its bipartisan infrastructure bill today. We've got the latest from both Capitol Hill and the White House as the Senate moves on to its budget resolution and reconciliation.
Best way to protect children is anyone that can be vaccinated. Surround the kids with people who are vaccinated, teachers, personnel in the school, whomever.
Florida now leading the country. The state has more children in the hospital with COVID than any other. We're in Naples with a growing debate over masks in schools. We start today with Governor Cuomo's resignation. NBC News correspondent for investigations, Tom Winter, here with me now. Tom, what a busy day it's been for you. So let's talk about what happened today. Before giving his 2 weeks notice, the governor addressing the 11 women accusing him of sexual harassment in the AG's report. What did he say to those accusers?
That's right. And today he actually included a response to the allegations involving Trooper Number 1, a member of his protective detail. Up until today, he had not addressed those directly, and his attorneys did not address them in a statement that they put out last week. But the governor did address his accusers today and those 11 women that came forward with sexual harassment or even up to groping claims. Let's take a listen, Allison.
There is a difference between alleged improper conduct and concluding sexual harassment. Now, don't get me wrong. This is not to say that there are not 11 women who I truly offended. There are. And for that, I deeply, deeply apologize. I thought a hug and putting my arm around a staff person while taking a picture was friendly, but she found it to be too forward. I kissed a woman on the cheek at a wedding, and I thought I was being nice, but she felt that it was too aggressive. I have slipped and called people honey, sweetheart, and darling.
Allison, several of the victims have come forward and issued their own statements. Happy about the news today that the governor has decided to resign. A number of people have taken issue with the governor's statements today. But at the end of the day, this is it for Governor Cuomo. And as you said, he's essentially handed in his 2-week notice. He doesn't have another apartment or another place to live. So conceivably, he'll use the remainder of his time to figure out what's next for him. Somebody who's only, for the most part, just known government work his entire life. This is his life, Allison.
Yeah, Tom, when you said that, I was wondering why the 2 weeks, but yeah, he does have quite a lot to sort out in the next 14 days, as you point out. Cuomo also argued against impeachment today. Let's listen to that part of his address.
It is your best interest that I must serve. This situation, by its current trajectory, will generate months of political and legal controversy. That is what is going to happen. That is how the political wind is blowing. It will consume government. It will cost taxpayers millions of dollars. It will brutalize people.
Yesterday, Tom, the New York State Assembly met to lay the groundwork for impeachment. What does Cuomo's resignation mean for those proceedings? Does this bring all of this to a screeching halt, or does something still need to go forward here?
Right. Well, I mean, that's going to be the big question. Impeachment actually still matters, even though the governor has said that he's going to resign, because if, in fact, he is impeached, it means going forward that he can't serve in state office again in New York. I mean, there's some people that think that he's laying the groundwork here for a possible second political act by bowing out now before things get too rough with impeachment or perhaps a criminal proceeding against him, although that's far from settled. So it'll remains to be seen, essentially, Allison, whether or not the state legislator, and whether or not they'll move forward with some sort of an impeachment here.
All right, so let's talk about those legal issues, which don't appear to be over either. Even after resigning, does he still face all the same or some of the same legal threats from the ongoing criminal civil investigations?
Nothing has changed whatsoever. So nothing about the governor being in office versus out of office changes any of that, Allison. The 5 district attorneys that are looking at this will continue to do so. Now, it's important to know, and as we've reported and you and I have discussed, these are not necessarily full-blown criminal investigations. Basically, a bunch of these district attorneys' offices have said, look, we've seen some things in this public report. You've said that the report is now public, and we can examine it and possibly explore if there are any sort of criminal violations here or not. So that's what we're going to do. We've asked the Attorney General's office for more information for their underlying evidence, and that's what they're waiting on. The investigation being run by the Albany County Sheriff and the Albany District Attorney's Office into those specific allegations of groping by one of the governor's assistants, that's a little bit different. That's a little bit more precarious for the governor. There's a little bit more of a path there just from what's available publicly for a possible criminal case to proceed going forward. It would likely be a violation of the forcible touching law in New York State. It would not require him to register as a sex offender. It would be a violation, a misdemeanor Class A violation. That's just based on what we know so far, Allison, but we don't know what we don't know, and we'll have to wait and see how these cases progress.
Yeah, I think we're going to learn a whole lot this week. Tom, speaking of learning a whole lot, if you didn't know who Kathy Hochul was, you sure know that name now, the lieutenant governor about to become the first female governor of New York. What do we know about her? What can you share with our viewers?
Well, this is somebody who I think is viewed by many in the state, just based on what I've read and from the political analysis that's been done into Kathy, is that essentially this is somebody who will govern in a very different way. There's no question, and the governor would admit so if asked, that he rules with a heavy fist. It is somebody who can be very direct, very blunt, and some people say threatening. I don't think that describes Kathy Hochul. She does, and she has had a significant amount of political success in the past, a former representative in the House of Representatives from the state of New York, and somebody who's also been able to be part of the governor's ticket, and somebody who has had her own political successes, as I mentioned. So this is somebody who is familiar with the process, familiar with New York State, has ties to the western part of the state, which is an area that will need help in the recovery, just as all of New York State, the whole country for that matter, will need with COVID-19. So I think her work will be easier just on the basis of the fact that she has friends and she has people that are going to appear to, at least at this point, willing to work with her. And I think that's a big change from what we're seeing with the now outgoing Governor Cuomo.
Yeah, what a difference a couple of friends and allies make, especially when you work in government. Tom, thank you so much for your reporting and for spending so much time with us today. We know you've been really hustling on this one.
You got it.
All right, let's bring in NBC News political analyst and former special advisor to Andrew Cuomo, Susan Del Percio. Susan, so great to have you back on the show. When we last talked, you said that you thought Cuomo might wait till the very last minute to resign, perhaps not until it was so clear that he was going to be impeached. Those proceedings hadn't started yet. The investigation was just underway. Are you surprised that he got out ahead of that today? What do you make of the timing, resigning today?
I think what it means is that he felt he had no other option. There was a schedule laid out for public hearings beginning next Monday that he was concerned about. And Andrew Cuomo would have fought this tooth and nail if he thought there was a path. There wasn't. So he had to call it quits when he did.
Susan, you were on Andrea Mitchell Reports earlier today, and you said this: what a disgraceful way of conducting yourself out the door. He basically had his lawyers discredit the investigators, discredit the media, and discount the accusers. And then he went on the air and talked down to people. Let's talk more about how his resignation went down today. Clearly, you don't think it was handled as it should have been. What would you have advised the governor to do? How would you have advised him to conduct himself out the door?
Well, first he had his lawyers basically rebut every point of the allegation. So, and then he went on to say, I didn't do anything wrong. I haven't done anything wrong, but I'm going to resign because I love New York and you all way too much. That's absurd. And the reason why is because he got himself not only in this predicament, but because of the way he answered, or how he responded today by saying, I did these things, but I didn't think they were wrong. I think that's also part of his legal strategy. But it was disappointing. You can handle things differently. He could have not had his attorney go on and make the case for 45 minutes. He could have simply said in a pre-taped interview like he did last week, I've decided to resign for the best interest of the state and call it a day. But no, he had to go on and try and make his case still, even at this last possible second, saying I did nothing wrong and trying to convince people of that.
Yeah, Susan, you bring up a great point, because I have to be totally honest. I watched his lawyer today, and then I watched Cuomo, and I thought, he's not resigning. This doesn't sound in any way like a resignation. And then there was that hard left turn, and all of a sudden, there it was. It certainly didn't seem like the setup you might have expected from someone who's about to walk out the door. So let's talk about the transition coming up. Current Lieutenant Governor Kathy Hochul, she's about to become the governor in 14 days. What do you think New Yorkers should know about the woman who is about to become the first female governor of this state? And how do you think she'll handle this transition?
First and foremost, New Yorkers should know she's very competent and will dedicate herself to making a smooth transition and doing the job at hand. Now, it's true that the lieutenant governor and the governor don't necessarily work hand in hand, especially with this governor. And so it will be hard. It will be somewhat difficult for her to come in and get a handle of the whole cabinet, of what all of state government happens in state government. I will say this, Andrew Cuomo did know all the levers of government, so that was helpful in how he governed. But I think you're going to see someone who's going to build a lot of coalitions, who will be reaching out a hand to work with county executives, with mayors, with the state assembly, with the state senate. And that's what's so important. Yes, she is the first woman governor of New York, and that is wonderful. But unfortunately, it was under these circumstances, and she should really just play it low key and do her job. Hopefully, she'll start her first press conference with a COVID update so people know what's happening.
Susan, that change is going to happen in 14 days. But even with Governor Cuomo leaving in 2 weeks, it seems like this is far from over, right? The impeachment investigation is still happening. There are still potential legal issues here. How long could this drag out? How long could New York State continue to sort of be embroiled in this political mess? Because not like we just snap our fingers, Kathy Hochul comes in, and all of this Cuomo stuff goes away.
It doesn't, and I think you will see the assembly continue to their investigations, especially into the book deal and the nursing home scandal that has plagued the soon-to-be former governor. But yes, you're right to some extent that it doesn't get swept under the rug, but this is also New York, and there's an election coming up in 15 months, so there's a lot of people planning their next steps.
Yeah, we may be hearing about that even sooner than we thought. Susan, it's really been a pleasure having you on and getting your insights over the last week or so. Thanks so much. And I have a feeling we'll be checking in with you a little bit more.
Probably. Thank you, Allison.
Other big news today, the bipartisan infrastructure bill is heading to the House. The Senate passed that $550 billion plan, 69-30, handing President Biden a pretty big win. We have team coverage from Washington. NBCNews.com senior White House reporter Shannon Pettypiece is on the White House North Lawn, and NBC News Capitol Hill correspondent Leanne Caldwell is in the Russell Rotunda. Leanne, let's start with you. This is a $1.2 trillion bipartisan bill. It's got $550 billion in new spending. And talk about bipartisan. We have 19 Republicans voting with all Democrats to pass it. We haven't seen a joint effort like that in some time. What else should we know about this bill in today's vote?
No, we haven't seen something like this, and especially on infrastructure, which is supposedly historically bipartisan, but it's something that the former president Donald Trump was unable to do, and despite the fact that he talked about it all the time, even former President Obama wasn't able to get a big infrastructure deal done either. So this is a big move for President Biden and for the Senate. The fact that 19 Republicans, including Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell, voted for this legislation today is definitely a bipartisan win. Let's listen to what Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer said about it on the Senate floor today.
Once again, congratulations to all of those who worked hard, so hard on this very significant and very important bill. And now we proceed to the second track.
But Allison, this is just the very first step in this process. The bill does not go to the president's desk just yet. It has a couple, what is likely to be a tumultuous few weeks and maybe a couple months before it gets there, because it has to go to the House of Representatives first, Allison.
So, Leanne, yeah, let's talk about this, because the infrastructure train just keeps on moving, but there's way more to it. The Senate is now working on a $3.5 trillion budget resolution, which we've been saying includes human infrastructure. House Speaker Nancy Pelosi saying she won't take up the first bipartisan bill until the Senate passes the second. So what does the timeline look like? What happens now?
Well, the Senate right now, as we speak, they are voting and they're starting on the very first step in that process of the $3.5 trillion human infrastructure bill for child care, paid family leave, a lot of climate change proposals, elder senior care for the disabled as well. So it's a massive Democratic priority. But this is not legislation that they're voting on today. It's just opening up the process. Then the House has to vote on opening the process too. And then the House and the Senate go back, actually write the legislation, and then they have to vote once again once this legislation is written. So you're right that Speaker Pelosi has said that she will not take up this bipartisan traditional infrastructure bill of roads and bridges until she also sees the complete package from the Senate of the soft infrastructure. And we are at least 2 months away from that step, Allison.
Oh, my gosh. Leanne, thanks for simplifying that one as much as you can, because I know it starts to become just a real brain twister for all of our viewers. What's passing when? Thank you. All right, Shannon, let's go over to you. Today's Senate vote was a big win for President Biden's agenda, even if this isn't over yet. The White House calling both of these infrastructure packages a historic investment in our nation's economic future. But they both have a ways to go before they get to his desk. So what is the White House saying, thinking about the road ahead?
Well, they certainly today were trying to highlight some of the elements of this package. So the water, the broadband, the bridges and roads and transit that would be funded by this. But the president was also putting a heavy emphasis on the bipartisan nature of this, specifically calling out Republican senators and thanking them. Some of them, he said, he thanked earlier on the phone today. And here's a little bit more of what he had to say.
America's often had the greatest prosperity and made the most progress when we invest in America itself. And that's what this infrastructure bill does. It makes key investments that will, one, create millions of good union jobs all across the country, in cities, small towns, rural and tribal communities. America, this is how we truly build back better.
And he went on to say that essentially this is a good day for democracy. It shows that Washington can work together. There's going to be differences between Democrats and Republicans, but where there is common ground, they can come and work together and get things done. Of course, hopefully, from the White House's perspective, this will make it through the House and ultimately get to the president's desk.
Shannon, only on a day like today with other big news would we be talking about infrastructure, not at the top of the show, but we did have some other big news in politics. And by that, I mean New York Governor Andrew Cuomo announcing his resignation. What's the White House saying about that today?
Well, and that resignation coming at nearly the exact same moment that Vice President Harris was presiding over the votes. I don't know if that timing was a coincidence or planned, but the White House says they were not given any heads up about this. The president hasn't talked to Cuomo, and they weren't given any notice that this was coming. White House officials were learning about this essentially in real time from their television screens. Here's what Press Secretary Jen Psaki had to say shortly after the Cuomo resignation.
Our view is that this is a story about these courageous women who came forward, told their stories, shared their stories, and an investigation overseen by the Attorney General that, of course, concluded today in an outcome that the president called for just last week. I know a number of you have asked whether the president has talked to the Attorney General since this report came out. The answer is no. Whether we had a heads up on this announcement today, the answer is no.
And the White House is also saying that he hasn't spoken to the new governor, or I should say soon-to-be governor of New York, but that he expects to make that phone call very soon.
Yeah, no doubt they'll be in touch shortly. Leanne, Shannon, big day on Capitol Hill and for the White House. Thank you both so very much.
We want our students to feel safe. We want our families to feel like they're sending their kids to a safe environment.
That safety could come at a cost. Florida Governor Ron DeSantis threatening not to pay superintendents and board members who require face masks in their schools. COVID hospitalizations on the rise throughout the country. NBC News correspondent Carrie Sanders has the latest.
With cases rising in every state, the U.S. is seeing the highest number of infections since February. Hospitals in many southern states pushed to the brink.
We're at an emergency situation here, no doubt about it.
The Pentagon now mandating vaccinations for nearly 2 million service members by mid-September. And with major school districts opening soon across the country, there's growing concern about keeping kids safe. But the debate over masks in schools is only intensifying.
Let the parents make the decisions. Let the kids breathe.
Fifth grade teacher Alyssa Tate says none of her students complained about wearing masks last year.
This is more adults fighting over something that kids aren't fighting over?
I do.
Tennessee mom Mersana Merrick wishes she'd been more diligent about masking her daughter Blair. The 9-year-old, who is immunocompromised, tested positive for COVID last week. Unable to breathe, she was put on a ventilator. This after her father passed away just 3 weeks ago.
At his viewing, she told me she wanted to be with him. And I said, well, honey, you will be one day when you go to heaven. I was scared that she would just not fight because she wanted to be with her dad.
Luckily, Blair is now recovering and breathing on her own. Mersada says masking kids should not be a political debate.
That's your child. That's your baby. Do you really want to risk it?
The CDC is now urging folks that go to high transmission areas, like schools, to wear a mask even if it's not mandated. And we now know it is the N95 that is the most effective mask. These masks that you pick up that look like they're from the hospital supply store, they're about 40% effective, while the cloth masks, they're only about 20% protection. But the CDC says even wearing a cloth mask is better than none at all.
COVID killing 3 of Florida's first responders in just a matter of days, a firefighter, a sheriff's deputy, and a police officer. Kelsey Tharud from our NBC affiliate in Orlando remembers these heroes.
It's been a devastating week for many first responders here in Central Florida. 3 of their own dying from COVID-19.
A loss like this is terrible because we all know him. We know his family.
Port Orange Police announced Thursday the passing of 39-year-old officer Justin White.
He's survived by his wife and 4 children.
That same day, the Orange County Sheriff's Office announced it too lost a deputy to COVID, 54-year-old Deputy First Class Craig Sehos. The day before, the Melbourne Fire Department also announced longtime firefighter Scott Allender had died as well.
It really is on our hearts and minds a lot of the loss and the sad tragedy that's occurred to those individuals and our brothers and sisters in the agencies that are that they're from.
First responders from across the area, like Orange County Fire Rescue Battalion Chief Scott Egan, have been offering their condolences. Volusia County Sheriff Mike Chitwood took to social media to offer his regards and also pointed out that right now, COVID is the leading cause of line-of-duty deaths. Really Battalion Chief Egan told me that even though first responders have more experience dealing with COVID at this point in the pandemic, it still poses a significant risk.
It still is just as dangerous as it was in the beginning, and it needs to be taken seriously.
Let's go to NBC News Now correspondent Simone Boyce. She has the latest headlines for us from NBCnews.com. Hi, Simone.
Hey, Allison. Well, we start with a warning from the U.S. to the Taliban, a U.S. peace envoy traveling to Qatar, telling militants there that any government that comes to power through force in Afghanistan won't be recognized internationally. It comes after the Taliban captured 6 out of 34 provincial capitals in the country in less than a week. The envoy hopes to persuade Taliban leaders to return to peace talks with the Afghan government as U.S. and NATO forces withdraw. And in Bangladesh, the government and aid agencies have begun vaccinating Rohingya refugees. Coronavirus cases are surging in the country, raising considerable alarm in cramped refugee camps where more than 1 million people are sheltering after they fled from Myanmar. And now to escalating tensions between the U.S. and North Korea. Kim Jong-un's sister and powerful North Korean official Kim Yo-jong saying today that South Korea and the United States should pay a price for going ahead with annual joint military drills beginning this week. Kim adding the drills, quote, further imperil the situation on the Korean peninsula. The U.S. Department of Defense has declined to comment. Well, an Iowa man has been sentenced to up to 10 years in prison for shooting a black teenager after a Trump rally. 26-year-old Army veteran Michael McKinney pleading guilty in June after authorities say he fired into a car of teenage girls following the 2020 rally in Des Moines. A 15-year-old girl was struck in the leg but did survive. McKinney originally told police he felt he was in danger after a conflict broke out between the teenagers and rally participants who had surrounded their vehicle. And the Justice Department signaling it could release some classified September 11th files. The Biden administration saying the FBI recently closed part of the investigation and is now deliberating to see if more of the documents can be disclosed. It comes after victims' families, first responders, and survivors told President Biden to skip 9/11 memorial events this year unless he releases those documents, which they believe could reveal connections between the Saudi government and the attackers. Allison.
All right, Simone, thanks so much. California's largest wildfire colliding with climate change. It's a vicious cycle. Climate change fuels the fire, then the fire creates its own climate. Here's a satellite image of the raging Dixie Fire. It's sending smoke 1,000 miles away. The fight to put out those flames about to get even worse. NBC News correspondent Emily Akita is in Greenville. Emily, California experiencing unprecedented heat and drought, and firefighters are about to get another gut punch. What is the weather outlook there?
Well, a grim one to be short, and in summary, firefighters are bracing for what they say will be worsening conditions throughout the week. As you mentioned, intensifying heat as well as predicted thunderstorms that could cause lightning to spark fires and continue to allow this Dixie Fire to grow. Another element they're preparing for is the wind, and that's something we've seen played out to an intense degree earlier on. In 24 hours, firefighters say they blame the wind for allowing the Dixie Fire to really grow and continue to burn over 110,000 acres. Now, I will say they made some progress overnight, so some hope there. It's now 25% contained. And we also learned that some of the mandatory evacuations have been reduced. Allison.
Emily, this fire destroying nearly 900 buildings. It's threatening thousands more. You're in Greenville, where we've just seen the destruction over the past few days. But there were a few signs of life today. A business owner taking a look around. How is the town trying to move forward? It just seems nearly impossible to do, given what they've been handed.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, it's hard to imagine what even the first step would be when you walk around this apocalyptic-like scene here in Greenville. Just cinder blocks shattered, just shelves of buildings and cars. The damage is just so severe. Some 75% of buildings destroyed because of the Dixie Fire here. Now, we did catch up. My colleague, Steve Patterson, caught up with one resident. He had a special exception to come into town recently to help shut off the water, but he really felt the wrath of the Dixie Fire. He says more than a dozen of his family members lost their homes. So when your sisters, your brothers, your nieces, your nephews, no one has a place to stay, what do you do in the interim? Here's that resident.
Well, you know, they're living in motel rooms, and they're living in trailers out in cow pastures. You know, everything's just overwhelmed, you know.
Nearly 900 structures have been destroyed by the Dixie Fire so far, and more than 16,000 are at risk. So many people hoping that they won't share the same fate as Greenville. Allison.
So as this fire continues to move, some people have gone to some unbelievable lengths to try to protect their property. I understand a rancher trying to save his land and his livelihood did some incredible things. Could you tell us more about what he was doing?
Yeah, absolutely. Now, fortunately, that individual has some fire experience. He's a volunteer firefighter. And as you'll find in some smaller communities like this one, volunteer firefighters are pulled left and right. Their resources are limited. So he actually first came to Greenville to try to save the town, but then was rushing back to his family's 500-acre ranch to try to douse fires there. At some points, he along with some of his family members, putting out spot fires up to 20 acres. Here's more from him.
I mean, it was 20 hours a day. Anytime the wind would come up, we had spot fires everywhere, just like you're seeing here, all over the ranch, up by the houses, up on the hill. Every time I'd fill the truck up with water, they'd be calling me saying, hey, there's another one. You got to come back now. And we just couldn't get to any of it quick enough.
Nearly 10,000 fire personnel are currently battling flames, the largest being the Dixie Fire in the U.S. Allison.
All right, Emily, thank you so much for your reporting, and welcome to NBC. We're so happy to have you.
Appreciate the welcome.
And it's not just in California. Millions of Americans dealing with extreme heat and stifling humidity this week. NBC News correspondent Shaq Brewster is in Chicago.
Hi there, Allison. Well, here in Chicago, we are already experiencing that extreme heat. The heat index, or that feels like temperature, hitting the triple digits today. Also, combine that with the threat of severe weather that impacted Chicago just yesterday. That 1-2 punch of severe heat and humidity combined with extreme weather is impacting folks not just here in Chicago, but really all across the country.
Overnight in the Midwest, a washout. Heavy rain and dangerously high winds wreaking havoc on the suburbs of Chicago. Further north, threatening funnel clouds seen twisting in the distance.
It's almost on the ground.
This massive twister west of the city destroying a silo.
Oh my goodness.
All of it ushering in oppressive heat and humidity. In the Pacific Northwest, millions are now bracing for a blistering heat wave.
We've got probably 3 or 4 days of some really high heat to get through.
Temperatures expected to soar 10 to 20 degrees above average in some places. Across the country, 101 million people are under a heat advisory, watch, or warning. In California, there's fear the rising temperature could fuel the raging Dixie Fire, still less than a quarter contained.
Just devastation, just killed me.
78-year-old Robert Johns lost nearly everything when the fire consumed his trailer.
I need to go down and evaluate what I have left.
The fire's impact stretching far across the western U.S., with cities like Boulder, Colorado, trapped under a thick plume of smoke for days. These kinds of extreme temperatures and wildfires cited in an unsettling new report on climate change. A UN panel of scientists issuing what they call a code red for humanity, making it clear a hotter future on Earth is all but certain without major intervention. And changes like warming oceans and rising sea levels are already irreversible.
And that international report was the most comprehensive report we've seen from that body since 2013. And experts are saying that the effects of climate change that we're seeing can be slowed with, quote, rapid, strong, and sustained reductions in greenhouse gas emissions. Allison?
Here in Surfside, this was a absolutely tragic event and something that's going to leave a mark on our state for a long time.
Florida's governor back in Surfside today, thanking first responders and giving them bonuses. The emergency workers at the deadly condo collapse back in June, the first to receive the state's $1,000 bonuses for working through the pandemic. Last night, another Miami condo building deemed unsafe, forcing hundreds of people to evacuate. NBC News correspondent Kristen Dahlgren has more.
A Miami condo building evacuated over safety fears after the devastating Surfside building collapse in Miami Beach spotlighted condo safety. Residents of this building were told to leave on short notice after officials ruled it an unsafe building.
We have a lot of elderly owners here that have no place to go. Some of them have COVID. Some of them cannot walk.
The condo building was added to Miami's unsafe buildings list earlier in the summer after an inspection.
So the first day we found that notice, I came home from work and I started crying.
Miami's building director says the building company started to make repairs, but they weren't good enough.
Their structural integrity has been degraded.
It comes after the June 24th tragedy in Surfside, Florida, when the Champlain Towers South building partially collapsed, killing 98 people.
Please pray for all of those who've lost loved ones and whose hearts are broken from this unspeakable tragedy.
Firefighters there ending their search for bodies just weeks ago. Details emerging after the tragedy showed structural concerns with the building before the collapse.
We got to get the answer to why that building fell down sooner than later.
In nearby Miami, residents of the newly evacuated building are now safe. The city is reportedly working to house the over 130 who are displaced, but many still questioning how this happened.
They didn't give us a warning. They didn't tell us anything. This is unacceptable.
It's time for the bottom line, our daily look at what's going on in the business world and beyond. Today, we're talking about choosing the right credit card. Cashback, sign-up bonus, airline miles. How do you find the best card for you? NBC News investigative and consumer correspondent Vicki Nguyen has some expert advice.
Spending is back in a big way, and lenders want your business. When it comes to credit cards, why are consumers in the driver's seat right now?
It's an incredibly competitive time. Bank issuers know that there's this post-vaccination explosion of spending coming, and they want to get the biggest slice of that pie that they can.
Finance experts say they're seeing record sign-up bonuses to attract new customers, from hundreds in cashback deals to 100,000 point offers for airline miles and hotels. Before signing up, know thyself and the perks you'll use most, whether it's cash, discounts on gas and groceries, or travel. LendingTree says some of the best no-fee credit card offers are Citi Double Cash, the Amex Cash Magnet, and the Wells Fargo Active Cash Card. What are some things to watch out for before signing up for a card?
What's really important is to look at how much the annual fee is.
Be aware applying for new cards could affect your credit score.
And if you don't want a new credit card, call your current company to negotiate. Ask to have your annual fee or late fees waived, or for a lower interest rate on your debt. A recent LendingTree survey found more than 80% of cardholders were successful when they just asked for some help.
A group of senators wants more protections for LGBTQ plus asylum seekers. In a letter to the State Department, Senator Amy Klobuchar joining 13 other senators requesting an update on a February announcement that the department would use a broad range of diplomatic and programmatic tools and resources to protect vulnerable LGBT LGBTQ plus refugees and asylum seekers. NBC News Out Associate Editor Joe Yerkeba joining me now. Joe, Klobuchar saying in her letter that they commend the department's actions, but at the same time, we also write regarding the need for additional steps to support LGBTQ plus asylum seekers. What has the department done so far, and what else would these senators like to see here?
Well, the department announced in February that it would fully support and advance the human rights of LGBTQ people around the world in accordance with a presidential memorandum issued by President Biden. But the senators want to know exactly how the department is supporting LGBTQ asylum seekers specifically. So they asked in their letter for specific plans regarding how the department will restore the country's former commitments to LGBTQ refugees and asylum seekers. And they also asked for updates on the progress the department has made in its global strategy to address LGBTQ discrimination abroad. So they really want to know what concrete steps the department is taking to deliver on that announcement it made in February.
Joe, attorneys from the Human Rights Watch say there are shocking stories of violence and discrimination against LGBTQ plus asylum seekers stranded in Mexico. What do you know about what's going on there?
Well, you can take a look at this data on LGBTQ asylum seekers in the U.S. There were a total of 11,400 total applications for asylum filed in the United States on the basis of LGBTQ status from 2012 to 2017. And recently, many LGBTQ asylum seekers have had to stay in Mexico due to the COVID-19 pandemic, and they say they have been targeted. So you can also take a look at this data from Human Rights First, which found that 81% of LGBTQ asylum seekers reported that they were victims of an attack or an attempted attack in Mexico in the past month. And that includes rape, human trafficking, kidnapping, and other violent assaults. So advocates say the situation is really dire for LGBTQ asylum seekers at the border.
The Trump administration, Joe, put up a number of roadblocks for LGBTQ plus asylum seekers, including things like disqualifying people who said that they feared for their lives based on their sexual orientation. Now, a judge blocked that rule, but how are some of the Biden administration policies hurting LGBTQ plus asylum seekers now?
Well, I mentioned that many LGBTQ asylum seekers have had to stay in Mexico right now, and that's because the Trump administration invoked what's called Title 42, which is a public health policy that blocks most migrants from entering the U.S. because of COVID-19. And the Biden administration is still enforcing Title 42 with an exemption process. But advocates have said that that exemption process is too slow to accommodate the thousands of asylum seekers there are, and that it's difficult to access. So it's currently blocking many LGBTQ asylum seekers from entry. And according to that data that I mentioned from Human Rights First, that may be leaving a lot of them vulnerable to anti-LGBTQ violence and other problems like housing insecurity.
Joe, always great to have you on the show. Really important reporting there. Thank you so much. There's a fresh debate in our country's classrooms that has nothing to do with masks. Many districts are now struggling over whether to keep police officers in schools as part of a nationwide racial re-examination. NBCNews.com contributor Safiya Semi-Ali covering this issue. Safiya, let's start with what's fueling that racial re-examination. You focus in particular on a school district in South Bend, Indiana, and the parents' concerns about the school resource officers there. What did they tell you?
And so in South Bend, Indiana, parents and teachers have sort of been fighting against having officers in school for several years, but they've started to redouble their efforts now, saying that the presence of officers causes psychological harm to students and really funnels them, to students of color in particular, and really funnels them into a school-to-prison pipeline. They say that the presence of security officers has led to an unintended consequences, including increases in suspensions, expulsions, and referrals to the justice system, particularly for Black and brown youths. And that's what Mark Schindler, of the executive director of the Justice Policy Institute, told me.
South Bend, Indiana has had officers in its schools since the 60s. They were initially there to manage tensions during desegregation. I mean, but that was more than 60 years ago. So how is this school district responding to parents and some teachers who say they want those officers out of their kids' schools in 2021?
So there has been movement. Like you said, this is a deeply entrenched program. It's been around for a very long time, but sort of in the wake of the murder of George Floyd, they've decided that they want to listen to some of these community calls. And they did this by opening up a community-wide survey and even facilitating a town hall discussion where they were trying to solicit feedback on what to do next with this program. Now, I spoke to the school district there, and they said that they're not looking to entirely eliminate the program, but they are saying that they want to to restructure the program, particularly the Memorandum of Understanding, which guides officer conduct to be more mindful of some of the issues that the community is bringing in front of them.
At least 33 school districts across the country have ended their school resource officer programs, but a lot of districts don't want to completely remove police from their schools. What are they saying about that?
So experts have told me that there are a lot of issues as to why schools are just so hesitant to move away from these programs. And really the number one reason is because it's fear. The police are seen as this extra layer of security, particularly when it comes to school shootings. And now we hear a lot about school shootings, but statistically they're actually very rare events. And there's no objective research that shows that they actually deter any of these events. But because they carry such a high emotional salience, which is what the experts said, this is what still guides these decisions and not the research. There's also this issue of society seeing police officers as a one-size-fits-all solution to all problems, whether that's mental health issues, addiction, gang violence. And so they decided, keeping officers in schools, that's sort of symptomatic of this larger issue. And really, there's this other issue of the fact that officers benefit other groups. For example, they benefit officers themselves by keeping eyes and ears to the ground. They benefit teachers and administrators by, if something were to happen, they can say, hey, we've got our bases covered. We had an officer there. And of course, they help parents by alleviating any fears. They just don't always help students. That's what research shows. I do have to say that there are cases where officers are positive mentors and there are positive relationships, but the research and experts say that the harm outweighs the benefit. And so that's really what should be guiding these decisions and not fear.
All right, Sophia, great reporting today. Thank you so much for sharing it with us.
My pleasure.
Actress Christina Applegate sharing another health scare, announcing over social media that she has multiple sclerosis. Today, co-anchor Chanel Jones has more on her diagnosis.
Emotional news from Christina Applegate, the Emmy Award-winning actress revealing she has multiple sclerosis, writing, "A few months ago, I was diagnosed with MS. It's been a strange journey, but I have been so supported by people that I know who also have this condition. MS affects the brain and spinal cord, causing problems with vision, movement, or balance." Applegate adding that it's been a tough road, but she'll keep going. A comedic powerhouse for more than 3 decades, Applegate skyrocketed to fame in the 80s and 90s, portraying oldest daughter Kelly Bundy in Married with Children.
Oh my God, an M&M.
And I got a W&W. The breakout role leading to a successful television career spanning decades, including an Emmy-winning stint on Friends, and a legendary role opposite Will Ferrell in Anchorman as ambitious newswoman Veronica Corningstone.
Well, you have bad hair.
Applegate is also currently starring in and executive producing the acclaimed Netflix drama Dead to Me, earning her 3 Emmy nominations over its first 2 seasons. This isn't the star's first health scare, though. After being diagnosed with breast cancer in 2008, she worked to spread awareness about the disease, sharing her experience with an MRI screening.
I can't stress enough, it saved my life. I mean, there's no ifs, ands, or buts about it.
Support pouring in for the star, Applegate keeping a positive outlook on her future, sharing a comforting message of support with fans. As one of my friends that has MS said, we wake up and take the indicated action. And that's what I do.
He could be the next Jeopardy host, but he has to get past some controversy first. Executive producer Mike Richards, reportedly the frontrunner to replace the legendary Alex Trebek. But now Richards is addressing discrimination and harassment allegations from his days at another game show. NBC News Now co-anchor Joe Fryer has the details.
Who is the next host of Jeopardy?
This is Jeopardy!
The man who may be the answer to that question is now pushing back on a daily double dose of controversy. On Monday, Mike Richards, Jeopardy's executive producer, who also had a stint guest hosting earlier this year, confirmed he is one of a few people in behind-the-scenes consideration to become just the second permanent host in the show's history. But it's his time at another game show institution, The Price is Right, that's causing a showdown. his more than 10-year tenure at the CBS staple, the show faced multiple lawsuits alleging discrimination and harassment. Claims made by former models on the show, including Lanisha Cole and Brandy Sherwood Cochran. One of those, a 2010 lawsuit, claimed Richards criticized models who became pregnant. Richards denied any wrongdoing at the time. Both cases were eventually settled. In a memo to Jeopardy staff on Monday, Richards said those allegations do not, quote, reflect the reality of who I am, and saying in part, I know firsthand how special it is to be a parent. It is the most important thing in the world to me. I would not say anything to disrespect anyone's pregnancy and have always supported my colleagues on their parenting journeys. Longtime host Drew Carey also defended his old boss on Twitter, saying Richards threw on-air baby showers for the show's models, who, quote, weren't even allowed to talk to me before Mike came on the show. He took them from just bodies on the stage to actual people that audiences could get to know. Richards also pointed NBC News to statements from his former executive producer at The Price is Right, Evelyn Warfel, who tweeted in part, his values as a family man and respect for women in the workplace are unparalleled, adding he was beyond supportive both during and after my pregnancy, which as a new mom meant the world to me. But Richards is also fighting to win over an even more important audience, Jeopardy viewers. The online debate and disagreement over who should be the show's permanent host has become a potpourri of opinions. The final answer remains a question as the clock is ticking.